Now I'd like to introduce you to today's featured speaker. Tom McGrath is Senior Product Manager at Crimson Hexagon, focused on the company's latest innovations. Tom has been working on computer vision for over 5 years and has contributed to many publications including Forbes, New York Times, Time Magazine, and Fast Company on the topic. And when he has time, he likes to write his own music and sing karaoke. Love by Nat King Cole is his go-to song. So, Tom, if you have some time at the end, maybe we'll have that question and have you sing a little bit for us. But seriously, it's great to have you. Please tell us what we need to know about computer vision and how it can be used for consumer insights.
Absolutely. Thank you, Earl. So the topic of today's presentation, as Earl mentioned, is really about how image analytics is being practically applied within the marketing space, more specifically social media analytics, digital marketing, and those specific areas. Jump over here to the next slide. So I work for a company called Crimson Hexagon. Just a little information about them. It might be helpful in understanding some of the topics that I'm mentioning. We're a leading provider of social media analysis software powered by patented technology and an in-house data library of now over 1 trillion posts, billions of which include images. And our platform is used to help brands and agencies answer critical business questions through the insights derived from our social data. So through this presentation, I'm going to kind of break it down into 3 pieces. The first component is really talking about fundamentally why we're visual creatures and why we're seeing this shift towards visual communication on social media. The second part will be talking about the actual technology used to analyze that conversation. And then the third and final part, I'll go over some practical use cases across the enterprise. So not only marketing, but product development, and a lot of areas where people and our clients, brands, and agencies are finding computer vision very helpful. And I expect by the end of this presentation that you will be some of the most well-educated individuals when it comes to artificial intelligence, more specifically computer vision as a subset, as well as the use cases. A lot of what I will be sharing in terms of the technology is based on research that has come out even within the past few weeks. So some really cutting-edge stuff that I'm going to be sharing with you guys today. So at Crimson Hexagon, we did some measurement and we found that there are 3 billion photos shared on social media daily, and this is growing quite rapidly. When it comes to video on YouTube alone, there's close to 1 billion hours of video uploaded. So in building this technology and trying to build out these use cases, we had to ask ourselves, well, why is this happening? Why is this fundamental shift occurring? And one of the reasons that we found was primarily due to camera-enabled smartphones. There's a quote here by Evan Spiegel, Snapchat founder: "Photos are no longer just a means of capturing a moment. They're a means of communicating." And camera-enabled smartphones have made that really easy to do. Previously with sites like Twitter, if you wanted to express some opinion, you would have to write 140 characters out. If it was before that with blogging, you'd write a long blog post. Now it's very, very easy to curate content. You go see a pretty sunset or you go buy some sushi at a fancy restaurant. You take a quick snap and you have something that's interesting and engaging that you can share. So I think a lot of why we're seeing this kind of shift towards visual communication and the predominance of that in social media is because of the camera-enabled smartphone. However, we really are at our core visual beings. If we take a step back into time and we look at the early ways that man communicated, it was visual based. You look at hieroglyphics and cave drawings. And one of the reasons that we moved away from those visual forms of communication was for needs and gains in efficiency, particularly in areas like accounting. It was a lot easier to record the information that Johnny Appleseed owed me 5 apples than it was to draw it. It just took too much time. So that's kind of why I believe that we saw a kind of a shift towards text-based language and recording of information. However, we're seeing a return to that, and I think that technology has really given us the efficiency back to communicate visually. Now if I want to say that I'm sad or I'm upset, it's actually a lot faster for me to send you a quick emoji of a frowny face than it is for me to actually write that out. So the same goes with GIFs and just the photo sharing apps. is technology has brought back the efficiency again that we need to record and communicate information quickly. So that's one of the other big reasons that I see that we are returning to this visual form of communication. To add a little bit more weight to that, I did some research and looked at a biological level, how we basically comprehend images and communicate. And so our brains, for one, were built for visual comprehension. 90% of the information that we ingest every single day is visual, and 2/3 of our brain is used for understanding that visual information. And not only do we process that information quickly, or rather, not only is that a lot of the information we receive visual, but we process it a lot faster than text. So visuals are processed 60,000 times faster in the brain than text, about 13 milliseconds, which is more or less than a blink of an eye, so very, very quickly. We also recall information with image-based content more readily. So we're getting a lot of information, we're processing it very quickly, but we can also remember things more easily. So people remember only 10% of the information they hear 3 days after hearing it, but they remember 65% of the information if it is accompanied by a relevant image. So usually when I give this presentation, I have 2 exercises that I do, but I can just tell you a bit about them because people will always ask, okay, like here are the stats, but stats can be biased and whatnot. So the question I usually ask as a quick test is, what is the first car insurance company that comes to mind when you think of car insurance? And there are a lot of different factors that can influence the decision, but typically here internally when I do that survey, people say Geico. And the reason that I believe that is the answer is because Geico is one of the most visual insurance companies that exist. They have the Geico Gecko, they have the money that you could be saving with car insurance, they have that little whistling pig, they have a whole gamut of different icons and visuals that will elicit that response. And I think it's very important for brands to understand, having imagery associated to help with that recall. Another quick little test that I do is I'll share a list of keywords like baby, ice cream, and I'll ask people to remember as many words as they possibly can. I'll remove that off the screen, and then they'll have to write those words down. I do the same with images. I'll share a picture of a baby, I'll share a picture of ice cream, and without falter, people can remember almost double the amount of things that they saw visually than if it was just with the text alone. So again, when you're trying to gain mind share and brand recognition for your company or the agency, if you're working with a particular brand, I think these are very important things to consider when planning campaigns and things of that nature. Another really cool thing about images and why I think that we're moving towards more kind of a world of visual conversation is that they elicit a strong emotional response that can sometimes override our basic logic. So there was a study in 2003 in which a Harvard student worked with a South African bank. He sent 50,000 short-term loan offers to a variety of different individuals with different psychological cues that they thought would affect the open rates. And essentially what they found is that if you included a picture of a smiling, happy woman with a loan offer that was 4% higher, it had an equivalent open rate with the loan offer that was 11%. So as you can see here, they would open it just as much as they would the 15%. And that was just because there was a strong emotional response elicited from that woman. I mean, my guess is they saw someone who was smiling and happy, it made them warm. Maybe they're thinking, hey, this short-term loan offer could really turn my life around. But nevertheless, the idea that I'm trying to communicate here is that a lot of the times, the images will elicit that ethos which can override our logic and cause us to take action on particular items. So again, just to recap here, 90% of what the human brain processes is visual. 2/3 of our brain is used for visual processing. We process visuals 60,000 times faster than text, and they also elicit a strong emotional response that can override our logic in many cases. So what is the impact here? Well, the impact is that on sites like Facebook, engagement rate with images are 2.3 times higher than posts without images. Twitter updates containing images generate 150% more retweets than text updates without images. But more importantly is that we're seeing this fundamental shift within the social networks. I mean, we started out with Facebook and Twitter and Tumblr, and for the most part they were very, very text heavy, and you don't see any social networks coming out like that anymore. If anything, the sites like Twitter are making an effort to become more visual, but you see Instagram, Pinterest, Snapchat, all highly visual, and these are the most popular social networking sites. So I think this is a strong testament to the science that I talked about earlier in the presentation, that we are visual creatures, and this is proof of it. So now that we're seeing this shift, the question becomes, okay, well, how do we analyze and understand these billions and billions and quickly approaching trillions of images for insight that can drive our marketing decisions? So as I mentioned, the second part of the presentation is going to be based on the technology used to do that. So the way that I look at the progression of image analytics is very similar to text analytics for those of you who are familiar and have worked with technologies like natural language processing and whatnot. So we initially started out with basic keyword tracking and tracking brand mentions. And the equivalent of that in the image world is tracking a logo, that is tracking that visual brand mention. We got to measuring volume, and then with technologies like topic analysis and natural language processing, we were able to understand the context of which those particular text mentions were being included in. So with things like sentiment analysis and emotion analysis, I know that when Pepsi is mentioned in a post, it's with a positive emotion, or it's in the context of drinking soda at the beach. And ultimately, that's where I see image analytics going. Right now, we're kind of in a world where we're very good at telling you what's in the image, but we need to bring all those things together to truly understand the context. And we're definitely getting close to that. And in some cases, we've achieved it. But you just need to think about the progression of the technology similar to the way that text has gone if you kind of want to look into the future. So I've broken down the different types of technologies and algorithms into a couple of different discrete categories that's based on a study done by Gartner. They look at algorithms based on them being descriptive, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive. So the first set of technologies that I'm going to talk about are descriptive computer vision algorithms. So these are the things that you're probably going to be most familiar with. So things like scene recognition. So we have capabilities to identify a beach in a photo. We can look at actions, for example, playing volleyball. Logo recognition, probably one of the most mature technologies that exist out there for the marketing computer vision use case of being able to identify a logo like Jeep in a photo, an object like a volleyball, and then facial analysis, anything from recognizing a specific individual like a celebrity to understanding age, gender, demographics, ethnicity, and even emotion from the face. So some of the other advancements that we're looking at to be a little bit more descriptive and understanding the context are things like single shot detection, automated image captioning, and unsupervised image tagging. So single shot detection is a really recent advance, and this is one of the things that came out within probably the last year. And what it does is originally we would have to run multiple models over an image to derive the different attributes. So if I wanted to determine what logo was in this photo, I would have to run one model on it. If I wanted to understand the different objects in it, I would have to run another. But now we can run one model and basically tag all the different things that are in a particular photo. And then with automated image captioning, be able to kind of tell the story of that image. So as you can see here, young boy riding bicycle outside with dog wearing a Nike t-shirt. And we're getting more advanced in kind of the stories and descriptions that we can tell, but we're definitely moving closer to understanding the context in that sense. And so unsupervised image tagging is something really interesting, and there's a lot of approaches to it as well. But where we want to get to is that a system can learn and understand new things without having to be taught by a human, what exactly that is. For a little background, the way that these computer vision algorithms work is very similar to the way that a baby would learn. You point to dad a million times, and eventually it picks up all the features and the patterns and can recognize that that's dad. And so we want to create ways in which we don't have to do that. And so one example of that is, let's say, for example, in this picture, I was able to recognize tent and clown. Now, we may want to be able to categorize circuses, but we don't have circus as a class. And so by understanding that there's a tent and a clown here, we can then go into corpuses of data like Wikipedia and say, tent and clown show up so often with circus and together that this has to be a picture of a circus. And so that is done in kind of an automated fashion in which it can learn in that sense, which I think is really cool, that we're getting to that point that we don't have to even teach these algorithms anything. They can work on existing data sets and begin to learn new things. So this, again, is some of the kind of the newer research, and I'm sharing this stuff with you not necessarily because there are specific business applications around it just yet, but to kind of stir the imagination as potentially how this can work. These are some of the more advanced things that are happening in research right now. So this was a study done at MIT where they basically fed this algorithm hours and hours and hours of the TV show Big Bang Theory, for those of you who are familiar, and eventually was able to predict before it even happened if someone was going to kiss someone or if they were going to hug someone. So that's another really cool thing that's happening in the space, is being able to predict even before it happens something that's going to happen in the video. So again, something interesting to think about. There could be some use cases here. We're exploring those. We haven't narrowed in on anything, but again, I share this with you in the spirit of collaboration and stirring your imagination. So the other one is diagnostic computer vision algorithms. So this answers the question, okay, we know what's in the image, we know what could happen, but why did it happen, right? And this is kind of where computer vision starts to fall apart. So within this photo, given current technology, I could tell you that there is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 men in the photo, when in reality there are 5. I could tell you there's a mirror, and I could tell you there's a couple lockers and a scale. But I can't actually tell you that there are 5 people in the photo because computers don't yet have what I would call a common sense knowledge base of general physics of the world. It doesn't know that when it sees a mirror, that mirrors cause reflections. And therefore there are not 10 people in the room, there are 5, there's just a reflection. The computer doesn't also know that the reason that everyone is smiling and laughing is because Obama is putting his foot on the scale and causing the weight to increase there. Those are things that the computer doesn't yet understand, but as we build what's called a common sense knowledge base where we can apply kind of these general laws of physics and other rules of the world, that eventually it will be able to understand why this photo is funny. Or why it's seeing multiple people in the photo. So that, again, this is really cutting edge. This is what we're trying to get to. This actually was a blog post published by a gentleman by Andrej Karpathy. If you're really interested in keeping up on trends in computer vision, I would definitely recommend following his blog. So the last one I have for you here, and this is a really fun one. Again, this was something done by the gentleman Andrej Karpathy, where we look at prescriptive or optimated computer vision algorithms. So not only can we say what's going on in the photo or predict what's going to happen or why it happened, we can tell you what you should do about it. So this gets into like the scary stuff about AI taking over our jobs. We're not there yet, don't worry, but this is just one example of which case it worked and could be applied to a marketing use case. So essentially what Andres wanted to do was he wanted to create an algorithm that would determine if a photo was going to be popular on social media. If he shared it, would it get a lot of likes? And so what he did is he took a bunch of photos, a bunch of selfies particularly, that had a low number of likes, that weren't very popular, and then he took a bunch of selfies that had a high number of likes as a part of the training data. And ultimately what it decided was that if you wanted your photo to be very popular and shared on social media, you should be female, cut off some of your forehead, show your long hair, oversaturate the face, put a filter on, a border. Some of the don'ts were take selfies in low lighting, don't take group shots, and don't frame your head too large. So this was telling the individual what they should do essentially to make it better. So he also took it a step further, and you might be able to see this here, where the computer vision algorithm would actually do the work for the individual. So it was quite funny. It actually decided, if you look here in the bottom right of this picture with looks like a Marilyn Monroe character in the sky, they said if you wanted this picture to get more likes, cut out the guy and just leave the girl. So I thought that was pretty funny. So the final part that I want to talk about, and again, the recap here is, there's a wealth of information and utility that can be unlocked by analyzing images. The technology is rapidly advancing, as I've demonstrated here, and it's important to make calculated investments to stay ahead of the curve. And just being a part of a webinar like this and understanding what's possible with the technology, why we're moving in this direction, I think is a very strong step in the right direction and being ahead of that curve and allowing you to be innovative in the space. So what does this mean for social insights, and how can we learn the what along with the why? So these are a couple different use cases for image recognition, and I'll get more specific. These are kind of the broad categories, but we're able to help with innovation, brand health, marketing optimization, revenue generation, even operational efficiency, and customer experience is definitely a big one. So one of the most mature use cases that I've seen for logo recognition, image recognition in general, is sponsorship use cases. So let's say that I'm at the NCAA Final Four in Indianapolis at Lucas Oil Stadium, and I'm Capital One. I've sponsored this event, or I'm Dunkin' Donuts or Reebok. Typically, no one's sitting there screaming from the top of their lungs the brand names. They're there to see the game, but they are taking photos of heavily branded assets within that. And previously, if you wanted to measure sponsorship, you would look at the amount of people in attendance. You could probably get some measurements from broadcast media, but there was absolutely no way to determine that ripple effect of social that you were going. So a lot of our clients are using our technology to identify the number of times that their logo is occurring at specific events that they are sponsoring. They look at the impressions, they look at the engagement, and a lot of the times they'll even look at things like the demographics of the individual who posted it based on this sponsorship. Were they actually hitting the people that they wanted to hit? So this is a very, very popular use case for a lot of our clients. Another really interesting one that we did was calculating ROI cross-platform for different social media outlets. So in this particular example, Snapchat knew that people were sharing screenshots of their promoted filters on other sites like Twitter, Instagram, and they want to be able to go back to McDonald's and say, hey, you know what, you got this many views on Snapchat and people engaged with you, but we also want to say that on Instagram you got 1 million impressions. And so part of the thing what we were able to do here is we were able to build an image classifier that recognized this sponsor icon down here, and then we combined it with the McDonald's logo, and we were able to pull back every single time that somebody posted a screenshot of this promoted filter on Twitter or Instagram. And we can do similar things with the cute little dog face that people always do on Snapchat, or the little deer. But obviously there's a lot of value in doing it in the branded use case. Another popular use case, again, for logo is crisis management, being able to identify when people are sharing information about their products and photos when they're damaged. This was with Toshiba. I believe in the Samsung phones, a lot of their batteries were exploding, but no one was specifically mentioning Toshiba in the text. And we get a lot of use cases like this. And a lot of times you need more than the logo recognition. I can give an example with Samsung. They came to us and they said, hey, we want to find every time our logo is mentioned, but we want to do it within the context of smartphones. And for companies that provide just logo recognition, the problem was that it brought in all types of stuff. Samsung's a big sponsor of a couple soccer teams, I believe, and so it was bringing in a lot of the sponsorship stuff. But what they really wanted to get to was when people were talking about the smartphones specifically. And that's a really important point that I would like to make, is when a lot of people, when they talk about image analytics, they think to themselves, all right, this is a way to expand my search. Okay, there's 3 billion photos, and 85% of them lack text references to the brands or the areas of interest, and they think, oh, I need to get that stuff too. But a lot of the times it's narrowing in on conversation and getting the right information that you want. So I would think of it as that way too. And we definitely get a lot of use cases where people aren't necessarily trying to broaden the search, they're trying to narrow the search as well. This is another interesting one at Bonnaroo, brand affinity logo tracking. So essentially at Bonnaroo, Converse was interested in seeing if they were getting the right demographic of people wearing their shoes. They were also trying to see if Bonnaroo was a place that made sense for them to sponsor the event. So here we were doing a combination of facial analysis as well as Converse logo analysis. So we were able to say to Converse, it looks like at Bonnaroo, Converse is a predominant brand. This might be a place that you want to sponsor to kind of boost your presence, or vice versa. Your brand doesn't show up anywhere here, but based on the facial analysis, this is the demographic that you want to hit. So this is going to be a great place to sponsor and get involved. And we have some product development use cases. This was with Dannon yogurt. They were looking to discover a new flavor of yogurt. And the way that they did this was they used a combination of object recognition to look at when people were sharing photos of yogurt and then pick out the different ingredients. So in this case, they could say, I see strawberries, I see granola, I see chia seeds, I see blueberries. And they measured that information and ultimately were able to find toppings that were very, very popular, which they were then able to turn into products. So, in this case, maybe it was apricot, honey, almond, Greek yogurt was the insight that they'd come away from that as what would be a popular product. Before even having to create it or test it with the market, they were just able to do it with the image recognition here. So another product development use case, and this is one that I think is really specific to scene recognition and image recognition specifically. We get a lot of the times people will ask questions like, can I get the same insight with text? What's the incremental value that I'm getting? My argument for that is always that you're going to be making biased decisions if you're just doing it on text. If we were to say that 50% of the world in conversation around brands and products and ideas is text, and 50% of it is visual, and you're going to make a decision strictly off that text, it's going to be wrong. But you know what? A lot of the times, yeah, you can get information around text, like finding influencers and things like that. But the one here I'm going to share is you really wouldn't be able to get it without the scene recognition. So here we wanted to understand the context of which a product was used. So imagine something like a hula hoop here. Predominantly it's something used with a little girl in her backyard. And with our technology, we're actually able to identify shifts and changes in the environment, which could possibly represent new uses of the product or new market opportunities. So here we saw a shift towards where hula hoops were being used by older females. They were being used in a festival setting, outside of, the general backyard. And, for hula hoop companies, this represented an opportunity for them to kind of go after this older demographic beyond the younger demographic. And I can tell you, for those of you who are followers of this hula hoop trend, those hula hoops that she's working with go for upwards of $300. So it was a really unique opportunity for the hula hoop companies to take advantage of. A similar example that I use a lot of the times, kind of a funny one, is the drinking game Dizzy Bat. So wiffle ball bats, again, primarily used as a backyard sport game that you play. And now you can actually find wiffle ball bats and ping pong balls all sold in liquor stores because they're used for drinking games. And so again, that was a new market opportunity for them, a market audience, and something that we're able to detect using computer vision, that particular change in the context of which the products are being used. And that's probably one of the most predominant use cases beyond the logo for us with our clients, is they want to understand where people are using their products. Are they drinking, Coca-Cola on the beach? Are they drinking at a ski resort? Because that can help with a lot of things, beyond product development. It can help with campaign messaging and so many different things. So again, here's that Dizzy Bat example I was talking about really quick, so we're able to tell the difference there. Another really interesting one is being able to identify moments of consumption. So I always tell people it's one thing to say that I love Starbucks, but it's another to be in a photo drinking Starbucks. To me, that is a stronger indicator of being a brand ambassador. It is also proof that you personally bought that product. It is a proof of purchase. And I've seen people do some really interesting things where they take their sales data and can actually begin to predict revenues and correlate sales data by looking at the number of times they are finding their product specifically on social media, which makes a lot of sense. If people are buying your product, they're going to be sharing it on social media, and so that should have a positive correlation with the sales numbers. So being able to kind of predict that and make judgments on hey, should I ramp up my customer care? Should I go to the manufacturer and start building more of these things because they're very popular? So this is a really helpful way to do it. And again, something that I think is very unique to Image in being able to identify when people are actually physically consuming your product. Again, another big one, product defects, damaged shipments. So we're able to look at things like the logo and then provide a classifier around this particular car or this box and say, okay, we found the Amazon logo and we found a crushed box, or we found a Tesla car and it was crashed and someone's complaining about it. So again, another interesting CX use case there in the marketing world. Another thing that we find it useful for is sense disambiguation. So for those of you who work with marketing analytics platforms or social media analytics platforms and have to do things like Boolean searches or keyword searches, you may often find with companies like Apple and Tide a lot of difficulty bringing back the right information. So when I do a keyword search for Apple, but what I really want is the company Apple, I usually have to add a lot of exclusions and inclusions, add words like computer or iPhone. But the really great thing about logos and objects and scenes and actions as search attributes is they do that disambiguation for you. When I search the Apple logo, I'm not going to get anything about apples. Or when I search the Tide logo for P&G, I'm not going to get anything about Crimson Tide or Alabama Tide or the tide of the ocean. It really helps you zero in on the conversation that you want to be listening to. And again, like the topic of the presentation, an image is worth 1,000 words. So a lot of times when you're building queries or trying to mine social for information, you're interjecting a lot of your own biases as to what you think the conversation should be. Consider you're trying to understand conversation around amusement parks. You may use keywords like Disney World or Universal or MGM, but you may not know that right now Volcano Bay is actually a really strong and trending topic. And to be able to find that out, you could just use something like an amusement park image classifier, and that really captures the entire essence of everything you could possibly want to look for, so you don't really miss anything. So again, it's something that I really, really like about image analytics and helping with the search. Another, for those of you who have brands that you work with internationally, image recognition is language agnostic. You don't need to be working with a platform that works in a particular language. We have a lot of clients who come to us and say, hey, we want to target this market that speaks in a particular dialect, and a lot of times we don't have the bandwidth to build sentiment analysis for some specific dialect in Northern Africa and do that for topic analysis and all those different things. So with images you don't need that. So this is an example where I didn't use any sort of text analysis at all whatsoever to get an insight. So I went into our platform and I had done a search for essentially the Starbucks logo. And I noticed in one of our visualizations that car interior was one of the top scenes, and I was like, that's very odd. I'm interested to learn more. So I kind of drilled down into that, and I saw within the car interior conversation, puppies and dogs were really big. So this was very confusing for me at the time that car interior and dogs would be big themes. And ultimately what I discovered in looking at the actual images once I was able to drill down to that conversation was that there is something called a puppuccino in which essentially if you go into a Starbucks and you say you have your dog waiting out in the car, they'll fill it up with a dollop of whipped cream in one of these small espresso cups, and you bring that to your dog, and apparently they love it. And it is a very popular trend on social media right now in which people are providing these little puppuccinos for their pups. And again, I didn't have to do anything with text. I didn't have to know any of this to be able to search for it. So regardless of language, this would have been an insight that you would have been able to pull. So again, if your marketing use cases span borders, this is a really great way, especially if you are, specifically, an English speaker or only bilingual, to be able to get insight across different languages without having to actually understand those languages. So what I'm going to show here, I think this is really important, is when I get asked the question, what is the incremental value of image? What am I missing or what am I not getting? So this is a use case with Capital One where I did strictly a text analysis. And if you come over here and you look on the left-hand side, the text analysis brought back these particular topics and themes within the conversation. So the conversation was typically around the Capital One Cup, credit cards, and the soccer teams that they sponsor and they're very involved with. The demographics of this particular conversation were skewed male, typically older, 35 plus. However, when I did an image analysis using logo and a variety of other different image classifiers, I discovered a completely different conversation around Capital One. It was around 5 Seconds of Summer and Justin Bieber and this event that they sponsor called the Jingle Ball Jam. And the demographics when I looked at that were complete opposite. It was young females, typically 17 and under. And for a bank like Capital One, those are the people that they want to go after. Their job is to get them in early with a savings account, build a loyal customer base, and have them when they're looking to pull out that mortgage on their first house. And for them, this was really great to be able to identify that audience because they otherwise would have completely missed it by just looking at text. And so this is what I was talking about when I was saying that you need to really be looking at both and bringing those together, or your decisions that you're making, your marketing decisions, are going to be biased. They're going to be wrong in many cases. Another example that I have of that is with Grey Goose. So we looked at this is an affinities chart that we have, so it looks at the different interests of the individuals from the conversation in that audience. And what we found with Grey Goose when we did a text analysis was that they were interested in things like the PGA Tour, food and drink, boxing, and NFL. But again, when we looked at that from an image standpoint, we saw a different story. We saw that it was skewing a little bit more female than normal. It was a little bit younger. And we saw things like wine and cooking and cocktails and recipes and blogging. So, you can imagine, working for Grey Goose, maybe you're thinking to yourself, all right, our demographic has consistently been, older men, and we want to figure out how to get, younger women engaged with our brand and making cocktails and having fun wine nights and, having cooking and dinner parties and whatnot. This would have been a way to find that and understand that and potentially create a campaign around it. But otherwise, again, completely missed. And this will only become worse of a problem as, the sites like Instagram and Pinterest and Snapchat become more predominant. So just to recap here, this is the final slide we have here, and I can open it up for some questions. Every use case for text analytics can be further augmented by image analytics. There are some insights, that I mentioned that can only be derived from the images themselves. Ultimately, I believe both are invaluable. You really need both to get the full story and understand everything that's going on. I hope you guys enjoyed the presentation, and happy to answer some questions now.
Great. Thanks a lot, Tom. As you said at the outset, I think that was a lot of news in a very compact, concise fashion, amazing developments and applications. I do want to remind the audience that you can post your questions to the chat with the presenter function on the left-hand corner of your screen. We do have a couple I want to start with. We pride ourselves on having a very intelligent and engaged audience for these webinars and for our events, and I'm pleased to see that a couple of our former trustees from member companies commented on your example of the recognition, I think you called it the single shot detection. The phrase that was captioned there was, if I can find it here, it said, it was a young boy riding a bicycle outside with a dog wearing a Nike T-shirt. And a couple of folks said, where's the dog wearing the Nike T-shirt? So
that's a semantic, my mistake. What I should have said is young boy riding a bicycle dog.
What's interesting, though, I think there's an important point there because, as you say, we always have that proverbial expression, a picture is worth 1,000 words. You turn that around, there are 1,000 things you can say about a picture. That I think you've illustrated in later part of the presentation some of the contextual issues, but that does raise that question. And one that I have kind of reading between the lines here, you mentioned the examples of cropping photos to, take off part of the forehead, get rid of that guy in the picture with Marilyn Monroe or whatever. But I'm wondering, would that itself be subject to different contexts? For example, that was, user-generated content, social sharing, where there might be certain rules that make for the sort of things that people want to comment on and pass on, whereas a professional designed advertisement or something might have a different set of rules. A fashion magazine probably shouldn't cut off the model's forehead, in the pictures. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the context for when those rules apply, one being, the demographic groups, because, again, the female might want to just as soon see the guy in the picture, or maybe cut Marilyn Monroe out instead. So a little bit about the role of context and how you analyze these images, and then the implications of how you act on that.
Yeah, so really what that comes down to, given the particular use cases, is the training data that goes into them. So if you were trying to optimize for an ad, a well-designed ad, and how that would perform on social media, you would want to look at well-designed ads that were performing very, very well, and essentially you feed those, what's called a neural network, those images, and it's going to be able to recognize the patterns and trends in what makes a really great ad. And one of the reasons that computers are much better at doing that is because a computer, unlike a human, a human can to some degree tell, hey, that's going to be a great ad, but a computer can look at 10 million ads that performed very, very well, and it can also remember a lot better than a human can what were the different aspects across 10 million images, specifically ads or whatever the case may be, that made that successful. And I've seen a lot of different use cases for this in marketing. I've actually even seen it in email, where people look at open rates and click rates of particular emails, and then they train algorithms to identify if an email is going to be very, very successful and have a high open rate, or similar with subject lines and things like that.
Great. Well, I have a lot of questions kind of rolling in, but I think several of them related to that general notion about the context and how, again, the audience and the producer may, vary the rules that you want to apply. One of the questions that came in from one of our academic listeners is a little bit more maybe about why the visuals are more engaging, especially in this kind of social sharing context than text. Again, we're verbal animals too, and we've evolved those capabilities. We can carry on conversations like we are doing when we're not even face-to-face. But a little bit more maybe about your understanding of kind of the psychological factors behind the power of images to create that kind of engagement.
Yeah, I think we live in a world where we're constantly bombarded with so much information, and so if you want a user to interact or engage with the post, it needs to be easy to consume. And just by the very nature of these these different statistics that I've posted, images are very easy to consume and understand. So if there's a message that you are trying to communicate, given the fury of information that we receive on a daily basis, we're going to understand it faster and quicker and better. If I send you a frowny face emoji, you're going to know I'm sad very quick versus me writing a block of text out. And similar with an image or an ad, it's going to capture my attention, and it can elicit some sort of emotional response as well. A picture of a sunset, I can process very quickly, understand it's a sunset, tie that to some emotional response of me at a kid at my parents' summer house, and I'm going to be drawn towards that. Versus if you were to write in text on social media talking about a sunset, it's just not going to be as quick. It's not going to click as quickly for me.
I think you make a very interesting point about that too, and I want to sort of probe on that. And that is, in a conversation, a lot of times what something means is only apparent when you see the response that it gets, and maybe it was a misunderstanding or it was an ironic comment. You alluded to the challenges of understanding text in machine learning and things, where things like irony and so forth are harder, to detect, and humans seem to have a natural knack for that. But have you studied sort of visual conversations, if you will? That is, rather than just analyzing a static image or millions of them with machine learning, looking at a sequence of exchanges of images to sort of parallel like a conversation, because a lot, again, of what the insights about a consumer's interests, motivations, and so forth would come out of analyzing a string of exchanges as opposed to a single statement. So is there something there equivalent to analyzing sequences of images being shared back and forth?
Yeah, so that is something that we are working on. Actually, it's funny you mentioned we're researching it right now, so I don't have any particular statistics or insights that I can share just yet, but we are looking at it, particularly around strings of emojis. We see a lot of people on social who will try to construct sentences using emojis. There's actually a really cool application you can check out called Deepmoji, and you can type a sentence and it will translate it into emojis.
Oh, wow.
So something kind of cool if you want to take a look at it.
I should point out, too, that a number of the questions, especially early on, were a little bit more about Crimson Hexagon and what it is you offer and do and so forth. And I would just encourage the audience and those questioners to reach out and contact Tom directly. There's contact information at the end of the presentation. We'll also be sending you an email with a link to the archived version of the webinar, and that will include contact information as well. So for those of you who want to know a little bit more about Crimson Hexagon, that would be probably the best way to get that information. I have another question. Actually, it came up earlier, and I want to go back to it. Collins, pretty early on, had a question when you mentioned that the images being language agnostic, that you can use it for analyzing international things. Are your machine learning algorithms or whatever taking into account cultural traditions, for example, and if you had a bunch of people in Scotland wearing long dresses, it might be guys as much as girls, so when you say it's language agnostic, there are clearly different customs, physical dress characteristics, and so forth that vary culturally. And so I'm just wondering to what extent you can handle those kinds of issues with image recognition.
Sure. So, I mean, you more or less do need to come to the table with that information in mind. And more or less, I guess, what I meant with being language agnostic is I can say for Google, for example, they recently launched a virtual assistant in Europe. And instead of having to write a query to understand conversation around that particular product in every single different language, they didn't have to do it. We just built an image classifier that could pull that back. Or let's say that your company is Coca-Cola and you want to be able to understand the conversation around when people are drinking Coca-Cola on the beach and maybe even singing as an action. You don't have to build that query out because beach and image is the same in every single language, and that's more or less what I meant. But when it comes to those cultural differences, let's say, for example, you wanted to identify photos that would be highly engaging, and you want to pick ones that the color would elicit that. So I know, like in some countries, blue, while in our country is representative or symbolic of trust, in others it isn't. So if you're doing a search for blue, you definitely want to come to the table with that knowledge of, okay, I know in this particular country I'm surfacing blue imagery or a product that looks like this, but in that country certain cultural norms and differences will change the way that it's interpreted. But for the most part, I just meant that I show a picture to someone in China and a picture to someone in Russia, they're going to understand and interpret that picture the same way.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, too, about sort of combining common sense and cultural knowledge with this new capability. There's a tendency to think that artificial intelligence just sort of you plug it and turn it on and it runs of its own. And we know it needs a lot of the training and input, with those nuances, and then it can scale in a way that humans can't handle. But ultimately, it's really giving you back to a certain extent what you put into the fed into the data set and so forth. I guess another question that comes up is, again, maybe back to this notion of irony in verbal conversations. Do you encounter situations where there is text in the image, which seems to contradict or conflict with the image? I mean, again, it could be equivalent of like verbal irony, where you're saying one thing, but you're implying to at least a sophisticated audience that you mean the opposite. So can you develop algorithms to handle that? Do you encounter that much? Just curious to see if there's sort of a parallel to verbal irony in the conflict potentially between the text in a given image and the image itself.
Yeah, so one of the ways that we actually try to identify sarcasm and irony is definitely looking at differences between the photo and the text. So let's say, for example, someone said something that appeared negative in the text, but they're smiling in the photo. To us, that could signal that there is potentially some sort of sarcasm, or they're trying to be funny or humorous. So there definitely can be contradictions within the photo and within the text. And the technology is not perfect either. So sometimes it can help us make better decisions where if in the text, let's say that we're 60% sure that it's positive sentiment, but in the photo there are a bunch of smiling people and there's balloons and cake everywhere, then we're automatically going to boost that up and say, okay, within the text, it's obviously this whole post is meant to be of a positive sentiment or a particular topic or whatever the case may be. I don't see them contradicting a lot, but certainly I think in the cases of sarcasm, it can help. We do see different things in the image versus the text, because a lot of times people are sharing like some sort of funny meme, but in the text they're being very ironic and negative.
Right. It's interesting. You sort of sketched out the evolution of why we adopted text in the first place, kind of a shorthand way of recording transactions and so forth, and now we're coming back to at least the technology to support a more visual form of engagement. So maybe we're just sort of learning how to be visually ironic or whatever. Need a little practice still.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, like I said, I really think that technology is bringing us full circle. You know, GIFs, emoji keyboards, you know, the Bitmojis. You know, we didn't have ways to draw things very quickly, you know, before. We had, you know, the cave drawings and whatnot, which was, you know, incredibly slow, or hieroglyphics. And so I really do believe that as technology advances, we'll see this progression continue.
So on that subject, and maybe this was the last topic before we wrap up, the example you gave with the humorous photo with Obama putting his foot on the scale and so forth, that as you said, it's very rich in irony and humor and so forth that humans see immediately, but it's harder to train the machine learning to recognize that. So this is going to be a bit speculative on your part, but how close are we to the day when we really can, you know, create artificial intelligence programs that would see the humor in that and know that the reflections are not other people but reflections of the people in the room and so forth? So just your thoughts about how close we are to really getting to that level of understanding.
So there are a lot of differing opinions on this. If you're really interested, I would definitely recommend a gentleman by the name of Ray Kurzweil. He writes a lot of books about it. But most people would generally say probably about 20 years where we're able to combine different data sets and, you know, just general understanding about the world and physics and, you know, just the common sense knowledge that we have and be able to apply it. You know, right now when I train an algorithm like this, the data that I feed it is very specific to recognize a face, recognize this. I don't train it yet to say, okay, here's a bunch of pictures of a foot on a scale, this is what this means. It would just be very expensive to do, and trying to coordinate that very, very challenging. But generally speaking, you know, I expect that we're going to see some really, really, really advanced artificial intelligence within the next 20 years.
Okay, well, that's great. Again, thanks, Tom. It's really been a fascinating presentation. And again, for those of you who are interested to know kind of what can be done with this now, maybe other case examples that Tom has, I encourage you to reach out directly to him, and he can give you the specifics on that. So I want to thank Tom and our audience. If we didn't get to your questions today, or there are additional things you'd like to discuss, do reach out to Tom. We will be sending a follow-up email with a link to the archived version, and there's a relevant working paper that we may include a link to as well regarding how photo taking in the midst of an experience affects it for better or for worse. I think a lot of the data that Tom's been talking about come from these smartphone selfies and others, and understanding how that affects customer experience, I think, is part of this whole story. So our next webinar will be how well do recommendation engines work for your product, with Kartik Hasanagar of University of Pennsylvania on September 27th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And as always, many thanks to the members of the MSI audience for participating in our member-to-member webinar series.